Women's Soccer Review Podcast with Duane Rollins and Jonathan Tannenwald on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald in Philadelphia with Duane Rollins in Toronto. Kevin Laramie is, as the saying goes in the business, on assignment today in Montreal. Our guest is Annie Costabile of the Chicago Sun-Times, who does terrific work covering the Red Stars for one of the great American newspaper sports sections in one of the great American cities, and especially one of the great American food cities. I will miss my trip out there this summer very much because there are very few other places that I go where you can go for a swim in a lake with the skyscrapers of the Magnificent Mile overhead and then walk down the street and eat lunch at one of my favorite restaurants anywhere, but this is not a food show. Maybe someday it will be a food show. But Annie, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much for having me.
You and I both work in newspapers. We both work in the dreaded mainstream media. And look, there are a lot of really great outlets out there on lots of different platforms at lots of different levels that cover the NWSL. But we know that when the league really hits big time, when any soccer league hits big time in the mainstream, but especially a women's soccer league, that matters a lot. It dramatically increases the exposure that the league gets. And we saw on Wednesday and Thursday when the NWSL announced the NWSL Challenge Cup, it made an enormous impact. Mm-hmm. Front pages of sports sections in a bunch of markets around the league, including the Orlando Sentinel, the Seattle Times, the Raleigh News and Observer, the Houston Chronicle was right at the top, and a lot of other papers around the country. Very prominent coverage, including Annie in yours and the Sun-Times, mine, the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was major in the New York Times. If you'll let me say this, it was major in the Chicago Tribune, which I know that the Sun-Times is a big rival with, but it was good to see in both. And a lot of those headlines were variations of the one that was in my paper, which was NWSL will be first league back. And that for this league is a huge spotlight that they've gotten themselves, I think. What was the impact like, in Chicago and how you saw it for this league getting that much attention?
I think it's huge, but I think one of the biggest points that the commissioner made, Lisa Baird, was that they weren't trying to be reckless and be the first league back. They put a lot of thought into this and, a lot of thought to keep, obviously, the players, all of the staff, all of the coaching staff safe, but it is a big deal that they will be the first league back. People are desperate for sports, and I'm not saying that their desperation is going to lead them to supporting women's soccer. Their desire to see, talented athletes on the field, I think will open up a whole new channel of fans that can see what an incredible league this is and what incredible talent there is on the field.
So my only cynicism, other than the risk of it, which we'll get into in a moment, this is something that, in fact, your reporting uncovered in late April, when Arnim Whistler, the owner of the Chicago Red Stars, told you that he hoped the NWSL would be the first league back. And I saw that, and I put it on Twitter, and it might have been a little overblown in the moment, to be sure. But if folks out there are a little cynical, I'm okay with that. Are you?
I'm not saying people shouldn't be cynical, and let's be real, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. This is America after all. But Whistler made that comment, and I've said this a few times now, not in a lighthearted way. He didn't say that without, the weight of the seriousness of the situation on his breath. He said that in confronting the reality of them being part of a smaller league. And the reality is that they are smaller. They are nimble. They have 9 teams that they have to plan around versus other major leagues that have, substantially more teams that they have to plan around. And that has allowed them to be the first league back. I don't think Whistler said that in any way, not taking into consideration the health and safety of everyone involved.
You mentioned how this will be a great opportunity to expose this league to those that maybe perhaps haven't seen it before. That only is the case, of course, if they do have access to it, if they do see it. One criticism I have seen out there, it's not a criticism I necessarily share, but it is out there, is that they have decided to put all but 2 of the games behind a paywall. CBS All Access, which is not a very expensive paywall, but nonetheless is. Do you think that was the right way to go? And should there have been more effort done to get these games out in ways that would be not paywalled?
You know what? I think I can't speak to that fully, but I will say that I think the NWSL is doing the best that they can to get the games out to as many fans as they can. And if a paywall is involved, I don't think that there wasn't an effort to not have that be the case. And, if that is unfortunate, that will be unfortunate for some fans who either aren't able to pay to see these games, etc. But I don't think that the league isn't doing everything they can to bring these games to as many people as they can.
On a different subject, I'm in Canada. Obviously, the Canadian Soccer Association is a partner in the league with the allocated players there. I'm wondering whether what kind of efforts are being placed to make sure that the Canadian athletes and the other internationals in this league can get back into the United States and can get there without any kind of quarantine needed or just the health and safety of that being taken care of. Can you speak to that?
Well, Baird addressed that in the phone call and said that international players will need to be quarantined. That's part of the protocol. It's part of the protocol with the medical task force that Baird said is comprised of 15 physicians, that there will be a quarantine period. That's just what's going to happen.
And I can add to that because I went chasing after the sort of the border laws angle. The NWSL is one of a number of U.S. sports leagues that got an exemption from the U.S. government on the border control laws for foreign citizen athletes coming into the United States to play sports here. So they're in the clear.
Right. And that's something that you brought up during our conversation with Lisa Baird. And so that was addressed. And obviously these athletes are going to be able to travel to the United States for this tournament, but it should be obvious that there will be a quarantine period. And if it's, if people are questioning that, they can, or have questions regarding that, there's more information provided in the Challenge Cup's protocols, but there will be a quarantine period and obviously consistent testing for athletes.
So the big question going forward now is going to be who plays and who doesn't, because every player has the clear right to not participate in the NWSL Challenge Cup with no retribution. They get their full pay, their full benefits. That was pushed hard by the NWSL Players Association, by the U.S. Women's National Team Players Association, which represents the World Cup stars. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take a moment here, Annie, to go through the list that I have of who said what so that our listeners know. And this is as of Saturday morning, to be clear, when we're recording. We'll go sort of in geographical order, I guess. Orlando, Mark Skinner, the Pride manager, said Friday, quote, "We haven't had any no's yet." He also said, "We've had quite a few yeses." And then there are others who are undecided. The big one who's out so far is Alex Morgan. But that's no surprise because she just had a baby. And as I said on Soccer Today on Wednesday, as soon as the Olympics got canceled, that gave her the leeway to, for absolutely correct reasons, take as much time as she wants in coming back to the field. But the rest we don't know. And there are a lot of big names on that team, obviously. Marta, Emily Sonnet, Ashlyn Harris, Allie Krieger, and so on that we don't know about yet. North Carolina, Jessica McDonald told the Raleigh News and Observer as soon as the tournament was announced that she's in, and her son Jeremiah will go with her as part of a very noble and attention-worthy agreement on childcare for the players that was agreed to as part of this thing, and it's to the great credit of the league that they did this. Lisa Baird, the commissioner, in fact, even said that she had a conference call with a lot of the mothers in the league to make sure that she heard from them. Mm-hmm. So they're in. Paul Riley, the manager, said on Thursday that all his players are in, but that might not actually be the case. I've known Paul for a long time. I like him a lot, but Crystal Dunn told ESPN that she hasn't decided yet. In Washington, Richie Burke, the manager of the Spirit, told the Washington Post that Andy Sullivan and Rose Lavelle are both in. Sky Blue in my neck of the woods, I don't know. I haven't heard anything yet. Chicago, I'll defer to you, Annie, and we can come back to that in a moment. In Utah, the Royals owner, Deloy Hansen, told the Salt Lake Tribune that Kelly O'Hara is probably in. Kristen Press, the phrase that Hansen used was, "It's less clear if she'll come." Press has been in Portland lately. And if she's out, that is going to be a big deal. Houston, I don't know. Granted, they don't have any of the big-time U.S. players. They do have Jane Campbell. They have Canada's Alicia Chapman and a couple other big Canadian players. They have England's Rachel Daly. In Portland, radio silence to the point that I'm not even sure what their training deal is right now. And with the rain in Tacoma, Bill Predmore said, his quote was, "For the most part, the star players know what they're getting themselves into." He also said, "I think it's reasonable to say there's been overwhelming support there." He was asked specifically about Megan Rapinoe and said, quote, "She's got time to make up her mind." Again, Annie, I skipped over Chicago because that's your beat, your expertise. What can you tell us?
After talking to Arnim Whistler, the owner, obviously of the Red Stars, he said that they haven't asked their players to commit yet. But before, I guess signing on to this tournament, they wanted to make sure that they got a general sense that their team was supportive of partaking in this tournament, and that was the sense. So generally speaking, he said that for the most part, their team is in support of going ahead and participating in this tournament, and that they'll know more about their final roster in the next week or two. But he does expect that a vast majority, if not all of the players on the Red Stars will want to participate in this tournament. And that has been, the consensus opinion from individuals I've spoken to around that team, the Red Stars here in Chicago. So there hasn't been an outward confirmation from the women's national team players or even the rest of the Red Stars team, but they are expecting the majority, again, if not all, is what Arnim Whistler said, to be a part of this tournament.
And that is, for folks who don't know, Alyssa Nair, Julie Ertz, Casey Short, Morgan Bryan, Tierna Davidson, the major Americans, Yuki Nagasato, the terrific Japanese forward and quite dynamic musician too, it should be said. Yes. Again, understanding that every player has completely her own right to not go. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of players in particular on this team, in Savannah McCaskill and Kealia Ohai-Watt, and a couple others. Danielle Colaprico has been in this situation too. But I think McCaskill and Watt are two players who've been on the cusp of making it to the national team, and have never quite, whether because of injuries or other factors. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of attention on the big stars in this, but how big of an opportunity is this for players like them to make names for themselves?
Oh, I think it's a huge opportunity, especially if we do end up seeing certain players opt not to participate in this tournament. That being said, though, I don't think the focus should be on a player putting themselves in a situation they don't want to be in, all to get, a better look. If a player like Kealia Watt doesn't want to participate in this tournament, it shouldn't be a knock on her athletic ability or the future of her career. We are, let's not forget, facing a pandemic. So that being said, if any player is uncomfortable participating in this tournament, it would be unfortunate if that then the storyline then became, well, how will this affect their future in this league or their future with the women's national team? We just do have to keep in mind that there's a health risk, and that has to be respected.
And I agree with that. And I know Vlatko Ananovsky and Kate Markgraf well enough to believe pretty strongly that there would not be a negative impact in terms of national team standing at all.
Yeah, and
only a positive impact if there is.
I'm not insinuating from their standpoint that there would be. I'm not insinuating from a coaching standpoint that any coach believes that. But it would just be unfortunate if the storylines from a media standpoint became, well, how is this going to affect Kealia Watt's chance of ever making the U.S. women's national team? It's just important that it does be kept into consideration that this is a pandemic, and any player that chooses to opt out, is in the right for doing so.
Oh, absolutely. I've asked all the questions that I have. I think Duane has asked all the questions that he has. This has been a terrific conversation, Annie. Thanks very much for coming on. Good luck out there. I know that Chicago, like Philadelphia and Toronto and a lot of the other big cities, has taken a pretty hard hit in all of this. For folks who don't know, the Red Stars had to leave the state in order to do any training because of the regulations that are in place in the Chicago area for good reason.
And Jonathan, one more thing before you let me go. I just want to say, our country is facing a lot of challenges right now. And with the murder of George Floyd, I just want to say that my thoughts and prayers are with every single person who is out protesting this murder, this senseless, violent murder. And I do want to give respect to the way that we've seen our women's leagues stand up and address this, specifically the Red Stars. This is a time not to be quiet, not to be silent. And I have a lot of respect for the way that the women's leagues have jumped to the forefront to address the racism in our country.
I very much appreciate your saying that. Our listeners know, and I think, Annie, you've seen me say over time, I am unfortunately in a position where the terms of my employment contract restrict what I can say. And I have a lot of respect and appreciation for folks who could speak up on behalf of not only journalists who are constrained, because, look, I'm in a lot of ways in my life, I fully realize I'm doing just fine and a lot better than other people, and I very much appreciate the privilege that I have in that regard. But I know there are a lot of people who are in situations where the terms of their employment force them to stay quiet when they'd rather not. And I appreciate those who are able to speak up. Annie, again, thanks very much for coming on the show. Sorry for the noise in the background there. It's been great having you on, and hopefully when or if we get to a point when things have improved and progress has been made, if we can get there, we'll have even more happier reasons to get together and talk about soccer. Thanks again very much for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
And for Annie Costabile of the Chicago Sun-Times, for Duane Rollins in Toronto, this is Jonathan Tannenwald in Philadelphia. Thanks once again for listening to this episode of the Women's Soccer Review here on the Sports Podcasting Network.